Hey everybody, and welcome back to another Max Velocity weather forecast. And in today's forecast, we'll be breaking down a massive storm that is coming to the United States over the next 3 to 4 days. And this storm is going to be really crazy. I mean, we're talking about some significant severe weather for both Monday and Tuesday across much of the United States. And this is the outlook for Monday, by the way, a very large risk of severe weather for much of the country. But what's even going to be crazier is that we are going to be talking about a rare winter storm for early April, anywhere from the Midwest back into the Northeast United States that'll dump feet of snow in some areas, which is not something we see very often in early April. I'll be giving you the latest breakdown on everything that you need to know in this forecast, and let's hop right into the severe weather potential for tomorrow across the United States, and we'll go into Tuesday's severe weather threat, and then we'll talk more about that winter storm. Beginning with tomorrow, we do have a large enhanced risk of severe weather. This goes from southwest Indiana back into much of Oklahoma, Missouri, and northwest Arkansas. And what this means is that there is a level 3 out of 5 severe weather risk, which is about a medium to medium high risk of severe weather across areas like Indiana, southern Illinois, and then back into Oklahoma, Missouri, and Arkansas. So this is the area where we have the greatest risk of severe weather for tomorrow. But with that being said, that does not mean we can't see severe weather outside of this area, because we are going to see some severe weather outside of this area. Notice we have a marginal threat of severe weather that goes from the Texas Panhandle and New Mexico all the way back into Virginia, and as well as back into West Virginia. It's a very large area for tomorrow. This means that there is an isolated risk of severe weather, widely scattered severe weather in the yellow shaded area, and then scattered to numerous severe weather in the orange shaded region. Now, the main concern for severe weather tomorrow will heavily depend on where you are in the United States, and this is the large hail threat. And this is really going to be focused across areas in the central and southern plains where the initial supercells develop. And notice that red area here, that is where the highest probability of large to perhaps even very large hail will exist, and that's going to exist in southwest Missouri, northwest Arkansas, northeast and central Oklahoma, and back into southeast Kansas. In addition to this, we have a hatched area, which represents that there is a 10% chance within a 25-mile radius of seeing greater than 2-inch diameter hail. That means up to baseball-sized hail is possible tomorrow in some of these areas, so make sure that you are protecting your vehicle. And though not everybody will see large hail, damaging winds, or tornadoes tomorrow, you always want to make sure you're taking the proper precautions in case you end up seeing one of these threats or multiple of these threats. And also make sure you have multiple ways to receive warnings tomorrow, because it will be a very active day. The damaging wind risk is going to be focused a bit further to the east, and that'll be across areas in northeast Oklahoma, back even into southwest Indiana. That is where damaging winds up to 70 miles per hour will be possible in a scattered to numerous sense of things. Outside of this area, in that green shaded area, that means that there will be some isolated damaging winds up to 65 miles per hour. Yellow shaded region means that there will be some widely scattered damaging winds up to about 65 to 70 miles per hour. Now, the tornado risk has actually changed since my video this morning. This is one of the big changes to the Storm Prediction Center's outlook. There is no longer a 10% risk area for tornadoes. There's also no longer a hatched tornado risk, which means as of now, at least for the time being, that there is not really much of a risk of strong tornadoes tomorrow. But with that being said, there is still a chance for a few tornadoes across this large area, because we're talking about a very large area, and it's going to be a pretty dynamic setup. So I'm not going to be surprised if we see a few tornadoes anywhere from southern Ohio and West Virginia back into Texas. Make sure you have a tornado action plan in place just in case you have a tornado warning in your location tomorrow. Even though it's a slightly lower risk overall comparatively to earlier today, it is still a possibility that we do end up seeing a few tornadoes. Now let's talk more about the severe weather timing across areas in the United States. For Monday, we're going to begin from south to north. So we'll begin with North Texas and eventually go further to the north. And this region is a bit different from most of the other ones we'll be talking about, because there is going to be a cap in place across North Texas for the majority of Monday. But by around 5 to 6 o'clock, that cap should be able to be overcome. And once the cap is overcome, we are going to get some severe weather going. So right around 5 to 6 o'clock, I would be very mindful, if you're near the Red River Valley in particular, in far northern North Texas, that this area in particular will have really the greatest risk of severe weather across all of North Texas, with all modes of severe weather being possible. The main concern being large to very large hail, but also a tornado risk will exist. Notice this little shaded area, by the way. These outlined areas that you're seeing here, that is where it's indicating some updraft helicity, basically meaning rotation in these supercells, and that's what the HRR model is showing right around 6 o'clock tomorrow evening. So keep that in mind. Sometime between the late afternoon into the early evening is when these storms will fire off, and large hail being the main concern, but also damaging winds and perhaps an isolated tornado or two will be possible. By 8 to 9 o'clock, those storms are moving through North Texas, and by around 9 to 10 o'clock, we may get some storm development across areas like DFW and just south of Interstate 20. The big question mark again will be, will the cap be overcome? If it's overcome, we will see this amount of storm activity, but if it's not overcome, I wouldn't expect many of these storms to even develop. So just keep that in mind, but obviously make sure you're taking the proper precautions. Eventually into the overnight hours, most of the storms are weakening out in North Texas. For those in Oklahoma, storms will not fire up as well until at least about 5 to 6 o'clock. Any storms that fire up will have an elevated tornado risk. I think the greatest tornado risk across Oklahoma will be in northeast Oklahoma and perhaps back down in southern Oklahoma, but this area in particular is a little bit more of a question mark area, because if we have a lot of storms like this that are all really close together, I think the tornado risk will be very low, but if they're a bit more spread apart, it could be a little bit higher. I think we'll have a little bit more spread out storm activity in northeast Oklahoma during the mid to late afternoon tomorrow. Eventually by 8 to 9 o'clock, storms are rumbling across eastern Oklahoma. Tornado risk overall will be much lower with these storms due to the fact they're going to be much closer together, and overall I do think it's going to be more of a damaging wind and maybe some large hail for the main concerns, with maybe a brief tornado. Back over in Missouri, this is the area that we originally had a increased tornado risk near a 10% probability. That has since dropped to a 5% probability from the Storm Prediction Center within a 25-mile radius. Timing looks like this: around 2 to 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, we will likely get 1 or 2 discrete cells to fire up across central Missouri. Those will be capable of large hail, damaging winds, and perhaps an isolated tornado or two. By 6 to 7 o'clock, more storms will fire up across Missouri, and a lot of these will be mainly damaging wind and hail producers, but I would not rule out a couple of tornadoes. By 9 to 10 o'clock, more storms ongoing, and we will likely get multiple rounds of storms across Missouri. Eventually by midnight into the overnight hours, most of the severe weather is winding down, and we should be talking about really no severe weather by the time you wake up on Tuesday morning. Now, in terms of the severe weather threat across the Midwest, we'll be watching for some storms during the early afternoon hours. Most of these will be damaging wind and large hail producers. By the time we get closer to 3 to 4 o'clock, more storms ongoing across the southern side of Illinois, Indiana, and as well as eastern parts of Missouri. And this is an area that I would be most concerned about a damaging wind threat, but there will be some large hail, perhaps a couple of isolated tornadoes. By 5 to 6 o'clock, storms are rumbling across areas in southern Illinois, southern Indiana, and by 7 to 8 o'clock, most of those storms are weakening out, and then we'll get another round of storms late in the evening on Monday into early Tuesday morning, but most of those storms will be mainly damaging winds. I still wouldn't rule out an isolated tornado risk overnight, so make sure that you have multiple ways to receive alerts. And eventually, as we go into Tuesday, more storms firing up right along the Kentucky, Indiana, and Illinois border, where there will be another risk of severe weather, and the Storm Prediction Center is upgraded to an enhanced risk of severe weather for southern Ohio, West Virginia, much of Kentucky, and southeast Indiana. That is an enhanced risk of severe weather, so again, a 3 out of 5 on the severe weather scale. And all of this is going to be happening on Tossing Trampolines on Tacos Tuesday. In addition to that, the severe weather risk is lower, but it still exists all the way back down into the Gulf Coast of the United States, so be mindful if you're down in the Dixie Alley. The main concern will be damaging winds, but I would not rule out some large hail and as well as a few tornadoes. I don't think we're going to have really much of a strong risk of tornadoes, but that might be something that comes into play. We'll have to see how this all plays out tomorrow, and eventually I think there will be a bit more confidence on whether that threat does materialize at all as we go into Tuesday. So here's the timing as of now across areas in the Ohio Valley and the Dixie Alley. Storms will be ongoing during the afternoon hours. We'll likely be talking about a linear line of storms with perhaps a few discrete cells out in front of that. That should allow for at least some sort of isolated tornado risk during the afternoon hours, but I do think the main concern here across the board will be damaging winds. Large hailstorms possible back down in the Dixie Alley during the evening, and eventually as we get closer to the overnight hours, severe weather is done. I will have a much more detailed breakdown on the timing of this severe weather event either in our live stream tonight in our Q&A section, so make sure you're subscribed to the channel, or we'll be talking about it more in our next video forecast. So either way, make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. The last thing I want to talk about is this large winter storm that is going to be impacting the Midwest and the Northeast. This is a really crazy setup, actually. When you look at this on the future radar going into Wednesday, we're going to have a large low pressure system and also a very strong low pressure system over Michigan, and we're also going to have a redevelopment of another low pressure system back down south of New England as we go throughout the daytime Wednesday. What this is going to allow for is one large shot of snow across areas in the Midwest and as well as Michigan, and it will also allow for a large winter storm across areas in New England as we go into Thursday. It's going to be a really crazy event overall. So let's kind of break this down for you region by region and in terms of how much snowfall you will see. This is the future radar for the Midwest as we go into late Tuesday evening. Most of this area will be just purely rain, but overnight Tuesday night into Wednesday morning, I do think we're going to start to see some snow, and the reason why is because we're going to have a northeasterly wind, and this will allow for snow across areas in Wisconsin and even northern Illinois. It's going to be really close to the Great Lakes, though. A lot of this will basically feel like lake effect snow, and that is where the greatest amount of snow accumulation will fall. It'll be right along the Great Lakes here. In addition to that, a lot more snowfall will be falling in northern Michigan. Once we go into the late afternoon on Wednesday and Thursday morning, most of the snow is winding down, so it's going to be really mostly during Wednesday morning. Crazy enough, the European model is indicating a pretty hefty amount of snow, especially for early April. Notice northern Michigan in the ballpark of 4 to 8 inches of snow, with a few isolated locations even over a foot of snow, and then back over in eastern Wisconsin, northeast Illinois, many areas between 3 to 6 inches of snow, with some isolated spots near 8 inches of snow. This is an early estimate and things may change a little bit, so just make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We'll continue to post updates on this as we get closer. Back over in the northeast, we're going to be watching for a lot more snowfall in the northeast, including northern New England. Notice this as we go into late Wednesday night into Thursday morning. Heavy snowfall will be possible across much of New England, and this will continue almost all day Thursday. It will not wind down until Friday, and with all that being said, a lot of snow will fall. Many areas currently forecasted to pick up as much as 12 to 18 inches of snow. Some isolated locations could get over 2 feet of snow in areas like upstate New York, higher elevations of northern New Hampshire, and even perhaps even into parts of central and northern Maine. This is still a bit more of a question mark area, so just keep that in mind. I don't know if we'll end up seeing over a foot of snow in areas like Massachusetts. It's a little bit too early to tell. Just make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We'll post updates as we get closer on this event, as there still is a relatively high amount of uncertainty, especially with that particular area that I just circled. Just a reminder, make sure to subscribe down below. We will likely be live for severe weather coverage here on YouTube for both Monday and Tuesday. In addition to that, we'll have another update on this winter storm as